My name is Mallory. I'm 32 years old, and am standing in my kitchen surrounded by packed boxes I didn't pack. My parents are sitting at my dining table with my younger sister Fiona, and they just told me I have until the end of the week to move out. My father says this house belongs to Fiona now. My mother adds that it's time I learned to stand on my own 2 feet. Fiona's already scrolling through her iPad, showing them paint swatches and furniture layouts for her redecorating plans. She looks up at me with that smug little smirk she's worn since childhood, the one that says she's won again. But here's what none of them know. This house is mine. Every single brick, every square foot, every door and window. And I have the receipts to prove it. Before we get into how this nightmare unfolded, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. Have you ever dealt with family members who felt entitled to something that wasn't theirs? Hit that like button if you think people should respect property ownership regardless of family ties. And make sure to subscribe because this story gets absolutely wild. You won't believe what my family tried to pull, and trust me, the ending is worth sticking around for. Growing up, I learned early that love in my family came with conditions, and those conditions never seemed to apply equally. My sister Fiona was born 4 years after me, and from the moment she arrived, the dynamic shifted. I became the responsible one, the one who had to set a good example, the one who couldn't make mistakes. Fiona became the treasure, the baby, the one who could do no wrong even when she was clearly doing everything wrong. When I brought home straight A's, my parents would nod approvingly and say, "That's what was expected." When Fiona scraped by with C's and D's, they'd celebrate her effort and take her out for ice cream. I worked 3 jobs to put myself through college because my parents said it would teach me character. Fiona dropped out of 2 different universities, and my parents funded her trips to Europe so she could find herself. Apparently finding yourself requires a lot of expensive wine tours and luxury hostels. The comparison was constant and crushing. Why can't you be more fun like your sister, Mallory? Why are you always so serious? Can't you just relax and enjoy life? They made my responsibility sound like a character flaw, like there was something wrong with me for paying my own bills and planning for the future. Meanwhile, Fiona bounced from one failed venture to another. She was going to be a yoga instructor, then a lifestyle blogger, then a boutique owner, then a personal stylist. None of these dreams ever materialized into actual employment, but my parents funded each new phase with enthusiasm and open wallets. I learned not to ask them for anything because the answer was always that they'd already stretched themselves thin helping Fiona get on her feet. Funny how she'd been getting on her feet for 28 years and still hadn't managed to stand. 5 years ago, when I was 27, I bought this house. I'd been saving aggressively since my first real job, living in a tiny apartment with 2 roommates, packing lunches, skipping vacations, driving a car held together with duct tape and prayer. I wanted stability and security, something that was mine that nobody could take away. I found this 3-bedroom house in a decent neighborhood, nothing fancy but solid and full of potential. I qualified for the mortgage on my own, put down 20%, and signed my name on that deed with so much pride I almost cried right there in the title company office. My parents came to the housewarming party I threw, stayed for 20 minutes, and spent most of that time talking about how Fiona had just been accepted into another certification program that was definitely going to be the thing that launched her career. About 3 years ago, my parents called with crisis in their voices. They were having financial troubles, something about bad investments and unexpected expenses. They needed a place to stay temporarily, just a few months until they sorted things out. I said yes because that's what you do for family, right? You help when people are struggling. They moved into my guest room with promises that they'd contribute to groceries and utilities, that they wouldn't be a burden, that they'd be out before I knew it. Those few months turned into 6, then a year, then 2 years. The contributions never materialized. Instead, I found myself paying for everything while they settled in like permanent residents, rearranging my furniture and complaining about my food choices. Then Fiona needed help too. Her latest apartment situation hadn't worked out, something vague about roommate drama and a lease that ended badly. Could she stay for just a little while? My parents pushed hard for this, reminding me how Fiona had always looked up to me, how family sticks together, how I had all this space going to waste anyway. So Fiona moved into my second guest room, bringing with her an astounding amount of luggage for someone who supposedly had nowhere else to go. She took over the bathroom, left her things scattered through every common area, ate food I'd specifically bought for my meal prep, and acted like she was doing me a favor by gracing my home with her presence. I paid the mortgage every month from my account. I paid the property taxes, the homeowner's insurance, the utilities, the internet, the lawn service, the repairs when the hot water heater died, and when the fence needed replacing. I bought the groceries that fed all four of us. I covered the costs when my mother decided the living room needed new curtains, or when my father wanted to upgrade the cable package. And through it all, they treated me like I was the guest in my own home, making decisions without consulting me, hosting their friends without asking, acting like they had every right to be there permanently. The last few weeks, I'd noticed them getting secretive, whispered conversations that stopped when I entered rooms. My mother and Fiona shopping together and coming home with bags they quickly hid. I found real estate magazines in the recycling bin with Fiona's handwriting in the margins, notes about staging and curb appeal. When I asked about it, Fiona laughed it off and said she was just daydreaming about her future home. I felt uneasy but pushed it aside. These were my parents, my sister. Surely they wouldn't actually try to take something from me. I was about to learn exactly how wrong that assumption was. The family meeting was called on a Tuesday evening. My father Harrison sent a text to our family group chat saying we needed to discuss something important and everyone should be in the living room at 7 o'clock sharp. I came home from work to find them already assembled like a tribunal. My parents on the couch and Fiona in the armchair, leaving me to sit in the wooden dining chair they'd pulled in and positioned facing them. The setup alone should have warned me. This wasn't a discussion. This was an ambush. My father started with his serious voice, the one he used when he wanted to sound authoritative and unchallengeable. Mallory, we need to discuss your living situation. Your mother and I have been talking, and we think it's time for some changes around here. I immediately felt defensive, that old childhood response to being called out for some perceived failure. Before I could ask what he meant, my mother Judith jumped in with her concerned face. The one that pretended to care while delivering a knife to your back. You're 32 years old, sweetheart, and you're still living at home with your parents. Don't you think it's time you experienced real independence? I stared at her, genuinely confused at first, then increasingly angry as understanding dawned. This is my home, I said, keeping my voice level. I own this house. My name is on the mortgage and the deed. You've been living here as my guests. My father waved his hand dismissively, like I was being dramatic over nothing. Don't start with that attitude, Mallory. We've all contributed to this household. Your mother and I have been helping with expenses. I opened my mouth to correct this blatant lie, but Fiona cut in smoothly, backing up the false narrative they'd apparently rehearsed. That's right, she said, examining her manicured nails with studied casualness. Mom and Dad have been paying at least half the mortgage since they moved in. You can't claim this is all yours when they've invested so much. The audacity of the lie took my breath away. I'd paid every single mortgage payment myself, had the bank statements to prove it, and they were sitting here rewriting history like I wouldn't notice or wouldn't challenge them. I started to argue, to demand proof of these alleged contributions, but my father raised his voice and talked over me. We've made a decision as a family, he announced like he was handing down a ruling from on high. Fiona needs stability right now. She's at a point in her life where she's ready to settle down and start a family. Your mother and I think she should have this house. I actually laughed, a sharp sound of disbelief. You think she should have my house? The one I bought with my money? The one with my name on all the legal documents? My mother's eyes filled with tears. Her go-to manipulation tactic. Don't be cruel, Mallory. You're always traveling for work anyway, always so focused on your career. You barely use this house. Fiona needs it more than you do. She has a fiancé now, Brett, and they're planning their future together. They need space for the family they want to build. This was the first I'd heard of any fiancé. Fiona had mentioned dating someone casually a few months back, but nothing serious, certainly nothing engagement-level serious. When did you get engaged? I asked her directly, searching her face for the truth. She smiled that triumphant smile and held up her left hand, showing off a ring I definitely hadn't seen before. 3 weeks ago, she said. Brett proposed at that little restaurant downtown. It was so romantic. We're thinking a spring wedding, and obviously, we need to start making this place ours, getting it ready for our life together. My father stood up, using his height to intimidate me the way he had when I was a child. We're giving you 2 weeks to find an apartment, he said flatly. That's more than generous. Your mother and I will even help you pack and move. Fiona's already started planning renovations. We're having the walls painted next month and updating the kitchen. My mother nodded along enthusiastically, adding that they'd already picked out new appliances and that I should take whatever I wanted from my bedroom, but the furniture in the common areas would stay since they'd need it. I stood up too, my hands shaking with rage and shock. I'm not going anywhere, I said as firmly as I could manage. This is my house. I have the deed with my name on it. I have 5 years of mortgage payments from my bank account. You have no legal right to kick me out of my own home. My father's face turned red, a vein pulsing in his forehead the way it did when he was about to explode. Don't you dare talk about legal rights with your own family, he shouted. After everything we've done for you, all the sacrifices we made raising you, and this is how you repay us? By being selfish and cruel to your own sister? My mother started crying harder, burying her face in her hands. Fiona came over and put her arm around our mother, shooting me a look of pure malice disguised as concern. Look what you're doing to her, Fiona said coldly. Mom's health can't take this stress, and you're causing it because you're too bitter and jealous to be happy for me. I looked at the three of them, this united front against me, and realized they'd already decided I was the villain in their story. Nothing I said would change their minds because they'd convinced themselves they were entitled to take what was mine. My father pointed toward the stairs. I think you should go to your room and think very carefully about your attitude, he said like I was still a teenager he could send away for a timeout. When you're ready to be reasonable and discuss this like an adult, well, be here. I turned and walked upstairs, not because he told me to, but because I needed to get away before I said something I'd regret. Behind me, I heard Fiona already on her phone with someone, laughing about paint colors and asking about contractors. She was measuring the windows for new curtains before I even reached my bedroom door. They actually thought they were going to steal my house, and they expected me to just accept it and walk away quietly. They had no idea what was coming. I locked my bedroom door and immediately called my best friend Shayla. She answered on the second ring, and I poured out the entire nightmare while pacing my room like a caged animal. Shayla listened without interrupting, then delivered her advice with characteristic bluntness. You need to call a lawyer right now. Tonight. Not tomorrow. These people are trying to steal your house. I don't care that they're your parents. This is theft. And you need legal protection immediately. She gave me the name of an attorney she knew through work, someone who specialized in property disputes. I left a voicemail explaining the situation and asking for the earliest possible appointment. I barely slept that night, my mind racing through scenarios and legal strategies and worst-case outcomes. By morning, I felt exhausted and anxious, but I got up and got ready for work like normal. That's when I noticed my phone blowing up with notifications. The extended family group chat, usually quiet except for birthday wishes and holiday plans, had suddenly erupted with activity. I opened it to find dozens of messages, all of them attacking me. My Aunt Bernice had written a long paragraph about how disappointed she was to hear I was trying to kick Fiona out and ruin her chance at happiness. My cousin Wade had posted in the general family thread on social media about ungrateful siblings who turn their backs on family. Neither of them had my side of the story. They'd only heard whatever twisted version my parents had already spread. I scrolled through message after message, each one worse than the last. My Uncle Porter, who I'd always thought was reasonable and fair, had called and left a voicemail absolutely screaming at me for breaking my mother's heart and being vindictive toward my innocent sister. He accused me of jealousy, of never being happy for Fiona's success, of trying to sabotage her engagement because I was bitter about being single. None of it was true, but had already convicted me without trial. My grandmother Daphne, my father's mother who'd always seemed fond of me, left a voicemail saying she was very disappointed in my behavior and that she'd raised my father better than to have a daughter who acted this way. I tried to respond in the group chat, to explain that this was my house and my family was trying to steal it, but my messages were met with dismissal and more attacks. My aunt told me to stop playing victim and take responsibility for my selfishness. My cousin said I was making up lies about my own parents to justify my greed. One by one, family members started blocking me on social media. I watched in real time as I was excommunicated from the family I'd grown up in, all because I refused to hand over my house to people who had no right to it. The smear campaign was sophisticated and thorough. My mother sent a series of text messages throughout the day, each one more manipulative than the last. Your father's blood pressure is through the roof because of the stress you're causing. If something happens to him, it will be your fault. Can you live with that on your conscience? Another message came an hour later with a photo of my father looking pale and holding his chest dramatically. See what you're doing to him? Is your stubbornness really worth destroying your family? I didn't respond because anything I said would be twisted and used against me. Fiona took the campaign public on social media. She posted a series of photos from her supposed engagement, pictures of her wearing the ring and looking blissfully happy. The caption made my blood boil. So grateful to finally have a real home where Brett and I can build our future together. Sometimes, you have to stand up for your happiness even when others try to tear you down. Family should support each other, but some people are too consumed by bitterness to be happy for anyone else. The comments section filled up quickly with friends and extended family congratulating her. And several people threw obvious shade in my direction without naming me directly. One of Fiona's friends commented that some siblings just can't handle when the younger one succeeds first. Another wrote that jealousy is an ugly disease and that Fiona should cut toxic people out of her life regardless of DNA. The worst part was when the smear campaign reached my professional network. I was in a meeting at work when my coworker Jolene pulled me aside and asked quietly if everything was okay at home. She'd heard through a mutual connection that there was family drama. Something about me trying to evict my parents. I felt my face burn with humiliation as I realized my parents had spread their lies beyond just family, poisoning my reputation in circles that could actually affect my career. I gave Jolene a brief explanation that it was a misunderstanding and that my family was dealing with some property disputes, trying to sound casual and unbothered while inside I was screaming. By the end of that first day, I felt completely isolated and alone. Every family member I'd grown up with had turned against me based on lies. My parents had successfully painted me as a villain, and nobody cared to hear my side. I sat in my car in the work parking lot after everyone else had left and finally let myself cry, deep gasping sobs of frustration and betrayal. These people were supposed to love me, supposed to support me, and instead, they'd orchestrated a coordinated attack designed to break me down until I surrendered what was mine. For a few dark minutes, I actually considered it. Maybe it would be easier to just walk away, find a new place, cut ties with all of them, and start fresh somewhere they couldn't hurt me anymore. Then I thought about that deed with my name on it, about the 5 years of mortgage payments I'd made, about the principle of letting people steal from you just because they're related by blood. I wiped my eyes, started my car, and drove to meet with the attorney who'd finally called me back. The next morning, I went to my bank before work to verify my mortgage documents and gather evidence for my attorney. I met with a bank officer named Clark who'd helped me refinance a year earlier. He remembered me and pulled up my account with friendly efficiency that quickly turned to concerned confusion. He showed me the account history on his screen, and my stomach dropped. The payment records for the last 6 months showed that mortgage payments had been coming from a joint account, not my individual account where I'd been making payments for years. I don't have a joint account, I told Clark, leaning forward to study the screen. I've never set one up. He frowned and typed more commands, pulling up additional account details. According to our system, someone was added as a co-owner on the mortgage 6 months ago. There's a signature on file authorizing the change. He turned the screen so I could see it better, and I stared at the signature that was supposedly mine. It looked similar but not quite right, the letters slightly different from how I actually signed my name. The date stamp showed the change had been made 4 months ago, during a week when I'd been traveling for work. My father had forged my signature. That was the only explanation. He had access to my social security number and birth certificate from years ago, when I'd needed them for various official documents, and had left copies with my parents for safekeeping. He must have used those to add himself to my mortgage account somehow, creating a paper trail that made it look like he'd been contributing financially. The realization made me feel sick. This wasn't just entitlement or delusional thinking. This was actual fraud, premeditated and deliberate. Clark could see the distress on my face and asked if I was okay. I explained the situation as concisely as I could, that I was dealing with family members trying to claim ownership of my house, and that these account changes had been made without my knowledge or consent. He printed out copies of everything, highlighting the forged signature and the timeline of changes. "You need to report this," he said seriously. "This is identity theft and forgery. I can provide documentation to law enforcement and your attorney, but you need to file an official complaint." I went straight from the bank to my attorney's office. Graham was a stern-looking man in his 50s with sharp eyes that didn't miss details. He reviewed the documents Clark had given me along with the property deed and my original mortgage paperwork. "This is a clear case of fraud and forgery," he said flatly. "Your parents have no legal claim to this property whatsoever. However, proving the forgery and getting them out of the house quickly might be complicated. While we build the case, they could try to establish squatters' rights or claim tenancy protections since they've been living there for an extended period." He advised me not to leave the house under any circumstances, to document everything my family said and did, and to file a police report immediately about the forgery. If you leave voluntarily, even for a few days, they could change the locks and claim you abandoned the property. Stay there, keep records, and let me handle the legal proceedings. I left his office with a folder full of documents and a sense of purpose replacing the helpless feeling I'd been carrying. I had evidence now, and a plan. That evening I went to the police station and filed a report about the forged mortgage documents. The officer who took my statement, a tired-looking man named Ernesto, listened patiently and filled out the necessary paperwork. He warned me that family cases were complicated and that the legal system moved slowly, but he agreed the forgery was a serious crime. He gave me a case number and said a detective would follow up. I drove home feeling like I'd finally taken concrete steps to fight back. Like I wasn't just a victim accepting whatever my family decided to do to me. I pulled into my driveway just after 8 o'clock, already planning to make dinner and organize all my documentation for Graham. I walked up to the front door and slid my key into the lock. It didn't turn. I tried again, thinking maybe the lock was just sticky. Nothing. My key didn't work anymore. They'd changed the locks on my own house. I felt panic rising in my chest as I realized what this meant. They'd locked me out of my own property, literally barring me from the home I owned. I knocked on the door, then pounded on it when nobody answered right away. Finally, my father opened it, but only a few inches. the chain lock engaged. His face appeared in the gap, and he looked at me like I was a stranger causing trouble. "You need to calm down, Mallory. You're making a scene. The neighbors are watching." I glanced around and saw that he was right. Iris and Vaughn from across the street were standing on their front porch, clearly watching the drama unfold. I turned back to my father and tried to keep my voice steady. "Let me in. This is my house." My mother appeared behind him, and I saw that her eyes were already red like she'd been crying on cue. "We can't let you in when you're being violent and unstable," she said in that quavering voice she used when she wanted people to feel sorry for her. I hadn't touched anyone or anything, hadn't threatened anyone, and they were trying to paint me as dangerous. Then I saw Fiona appear in the background with her phone out, recording me. She smiled slightly when she saw that I'd noticed, making sure to capture my reaction. They were creating evidence to use against me, building a narrative of me as unhinged and threatening. I pulled out my phone and called the police for the second time that day, reporting an illegal eviction. While I waited for them to arrive, I called Shayla. She lived 20 minutes away and said she'd come immediately. The police arrived first, 2 officers named Carmen and Dylan who asked what was going on. My father came out onto the porch, leaving the door closed behind him, and immediately launched into his victim routine. "Our daughter is having a mental breakdown," he told them with perfect concern in his voice. "We're very worried about her. She's been under a lot of stress with her job, and she's becoming paranoid and making wild accusations. We're afraid to let her in the house when she's acting this way." My mother came out too, crying dramatically into a tissue. "She's not herself, officer. She's saying horrible things about us, accusing us of terrible things we'd never do. We just want her to get help, but she won't listen to reason." Then my father pulled out the forged joint account documents and showed them to Officer Carmen. "We've been supporting this house financially," he explained smoothly. "We have just as much right to be here as she does, and we can't have her threatening us in our own home." The way he said "our home" made me want to scream. Officer Carmen turned to me and asked for my documentation. I showed her the deed with only my name on it, the mortgage statements from my bank showing 5 years of payments from my account alone, and the forgery evidence Clark had given me that morning. I explained about the police report I'd just filed, giving Officer Dylan the case number Officer Ernesto had provided. Both officers examined everything carefully while my parents watched with growing nervousness. Officer Dylan looked at the dates on the forged documents and then at my father. "These discrepancies are significant," he said carefully. "This appears to be a civil property dispute that will need to be resolved in court. We can't force entry or remove anyone without a court order." He turned to me with genuine sympathy in his eyes. "I understand this is your property, but you'll need to pursue this through legal channels. Do you have somewhere else you can stay tonight?" Shayla arrived just as the officers were wrapping up, and I felt immensely grateful to see her furious face. She took one look at the situation and immediately understood everything. "You're coming home with me," she announced to everyone present. "And you people should be ashamed of yourselves." She glared at my parents with open contempt, then guided me to her car. As we pulled away, I saw Fiona back in the window, taking photos of us leaving. That night, she posted on social media about cutting toxic people out of her life and starting fresh, and her comments section filled with support from people who had no idea they were cheering for the villain. I spent that night at Shayla's apartment, lying awake on her couch and staring at the ceiling while my mind raced through everything that had happened. My family had stolen my house, turned my entire extended family against me, and now had me locked out of my own property while they played victims to anyone who'd listen. I felt powerless and furious in equal measure, cycling between wanting to break down their door and wanting to just disappear somewhere they'd never find me. The next morning, I woke to more social media warfare. Fiona had posted a long, emotional message about how she'd always admired her older sister and looked up to her, but sometimes you have to accept that people aren't who you thought they were. She wrote about how I'd become bitter and jealous over the years, unable to handle her happiness, and that she was heartbroken to lose our relationship, but had to protect herself and her future husband from my negativity. The post had been shared dozens of times, with friends and extended family members commenting their support and expressing shock at how I'd supposedly changed. My Aunt Bernice shared it with her own addition about how she'd always suspected I had issues with jealousy but hoped I'd grow out of it. My cousin Wade posted a vague post about family betrayal that was obviously directed at me. Even people I'd been friendly with growing up were accepting this narrative without question, treating me like I'd committed some unforgivable sin instead of simply refusing to hand over my house to people who had no right to it. I wanted to defend myself, to post my own side of the story with all the evidence I had. But Graham had explicitly told me not to discuss the case on social media, where anything I said could be used against me later. So I stayed silent while they destroyed my reputation, and the silence felt like being smothered. Shayla kept me grounded, reminding me that these people didn't matter, that I had the truth and the evidence on my side, and that once this got to court, the lies would fall apart. But it was hard to believe that when my entire family had united against me and convinced themselves I was the monster. Graham filed an emergency injunction that day to get me back into my house while the case proceeded. The court date was set for 5 days out, which felt like an eternity. In the meantime, I had to live out of a duffel bag at Shayla's place and rely on her generosity while my family settled into my home like they'd conquered it. I went to work and pretended everything was fine, came home to Shayla's apartment and strategized with her and Graham about the case, and tried not to fall apart from the stress. During this time, I started digging deeper into my family's finances, looking for anything that might explain why they were doing this. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. My parents hadn't filed their taxes properly in 3 years, and they owed the IRS over $70,000. They'd been hiding this debt, letting penalties and interest pile up while they lived rent-free in my house. They wanted my house not just to give to Fiona, but to sell it and use the proceeds to pay off their debt and finance their lifestyle. They planned to claim the house was family property, sell it, pocket the profit, and leave me with nothing. I also discovered that Fiona's engagement was a complete fabrication. I did a reverse image search on the photos she'd posted of her supposedly romantic proposal, and they came from a stock photography website. The ring she was wearing had been purchased from an online retailer 2 weeks before the proposal supposedly happened. Brett didn't exist. She'd invented an entire fiancé to gain sympathy and justify why she needed my house. The level of deception was staggering. When I showed all of this to Graham, he actually smiled for the first time since I'd met him. "This is good," he said, organizing the evidence into files for court. "They've committed multiple acts of fraud, and we can prove all of it. They're going to regret ever trying this." I felt a surge of hope for the first time in days. Maybe I really could win this. Maybe the truth actually would matter. Shayla helped me trace Fiona's engagement posts back even further, and found her Pinterest account with boards dedicated to house renovations, all created 6 months earlier. She'd been planning to take my house for half a year, carefully setting up her fake engagement story and manipulating our parents into helping her steal from me. This wasn't a spontaneous decision or a misunderstanding, it was a calculated, long-term scheme. I also found a text message thread between my father and my Uncle Porter discussing how to get the house transferred into Fiona's name. Uncle Porter, who was a notary, had apparently helped with the forgery of my signature on the mortgage documents. He'd used his official position to make the fraud look legitimate. When I confronted him by phone, demanding to know how he could do this, he immediately hung up on me. 5 minutes later, I received a text from him threatening to sue me for harassment if I contacted him again. Graham's response was perfect. "Let them panic. Panicked people make mistakes." The days crawled by while I waited for the court hearing. I organized evidence, prepared my testimony, and tried to stay calm despite the constant attacks on social media and the messages from family members calling me every terrible name they could think of. My grandmother sent an email saying it'd broken my mother's heart and that she hoped I was proud of myself for tearing the family apart. I didn't respond. There was no point, they'd all chosen to believe lies over asking for my side of the story. Finally, the day of the hearing arrived. I dressed carefully in professional clothes, gathered all my documents into a folder, and met Graham at the courthouse. As I walked up the steps, I saw my entire extended family gathered on my parents' side, all of them glaring at me like I was evil personified. My grandmother sat in the front row behind my parents, her face set in disappointed lines. My aunt and uncle were there. My cousins, even family friends who'd known me since childhood. All of them had been convinced I was the villain, and they'd come to watch me lose. I took my seat next to Graham and tried to ignore the weight of their judgment. This was it. This was where I'd either prove I owned my house or lose everything I'd worked for. I looked across the courtroom at my parents and Fiona, sitting with their sleazy-looking attorney named Roland, and I saw that they truly believed they were going to win. They'd constructed such an elaborate web of lies that they'd convinced themselves it was true. They had no idea what was about to hit them. The morning after my first meeting with Graham following the lockout, I woke up on Shayla's couch with new determination replacing the despair I'd felt the night before. I refused to be a victim anymore. If my family wanted a legal fight, I'd give them one backed by every shred of evidence I could find. Shayla made coffee and sat with me while I created a detailed timeline of everything that had happened, every lie my family had told, every manipulation they'd attempted. Graham had already filed the emergency injunction, but he told me we needed to build an airtight case for the full hearing. That meant gathering every piece of documentation that proved my sole ownership and my family's fraud. I started with my own records, organizing 5 years of mortgage statements that showed every payment coming directly from my personal account. Then I pulled up my tax returns showing the mortgage interest deductions in my name alone. I had the original purchase agreement from when I'd bought the house, the home inspection report, the closing documents with only my signature. But I needed more than just proof of ownership. I needed to prove their fraud. That's when I remembered that years ago, my father had asked me to help him file taxes, and I'd accessed his financial records through a shared tax preparation software. I logged in with my old credentials, hoping he hadn't changed them, and discovered he hadn't. His entire financial history was there, and what I found was damning. Not only had he and my mother failed to file proper tax returns for the last 3 years, but they'd also hidden significant income from investments that had failed spectacularly. They owed the IRS $73,000 in back taxes, penalties, and interest. This explained everything. They didn't just want my house to give to Fiona. They wanted to sell it, claim the proceeds as family assets, and use my equity to pay off their massive debt. My house was worth approximately $350,000, and it'd paid off about $120,000 of the mortgage. That equity was more than enough to cover their IRS debt and leave them with money to spare. They'd planned to steal my investment, my financial security, and my future, all to fix their own financial disasters. I showed Graham everything I'd found. He reviewed it carefully, making notes and asking specific questions about when I'd accessed these records, and whether I had legal right to this information. Since my father had given me permission to access his tax accounts years ago and never revoked that access, we were in the clear, legally. "This is excellent," Graham said, his stern face showing something close to satisfaction. "We can demonstrate clear motive for their fraud. They didn't just want your house on a whim. They desperately needed it to solve their own financial crisis." Then I decided to investigate Fiona's engagement more thoroughly. If Shed lied about having a fiancé, there had to be more evidence of that deception. I started with her social media posts, saving screenshots of every photo Shed claimed was from her engagement. Then I did reverse image searches on each one. The proposal photos came from a wedding planning website stock image collection. The romantic dinner photos came from a restaurant's promotional materials. Even the candid shots of her supposedly gazing adoringly at Brett were actually photos of her alone that Shed cropped and described as if someone had been there with her. Shayla helped me dig through Fiona's Pinterest account more thoroughly. We found not just the home renovation boards Shed created 6 months ago but also shopping lists for furniture, paint color comparisons with my actual house layout, and even a timeline for when she planned to do each renovation. Shed written notes like, should have full control by March, and need to get Mallory out before spring. This wasn't spontaneous. Fiona had been plotting to take my house since at least last fall, probably convincing our parents to help her by playing on their favoritism and financial desperation. Graham sent a subpoena to the online retailer where Fiona had purchased her engagement ring. They provided records showing Shed bought it herself 2 weeks before her supposed proposal, and Shed searched for engagement rings under $500 and how to make a fake engagement look real. Shed literally Googled instructions for her deception. We also found the exact stock photo website where Shed obtained the proposal images and receipts for her purchase of those photos. During this evidence gathering, Clark from the bank reached out to me. Had been thinking about my case and wanted to offer his testimony about the forged documents. He pulled additional records showing that someone had called the bank 4 months ago asking detailed questions about adding co-owners to adult children's mortgages. The caller had identified himself as my father and had asked specifically about what documentation would be required. Clark had explained that it would need notarized permission from me and possibly my appearance at the bank. My father had thanked him and hung up, then apparently decided to forge the documents instead of following the legal process. Clark's willingness to testify was a huge boost to our case. Having a neutral bank official confirm the forgery attempt, and my father's suspicious inquiries would carry significant weight in court. Graham immediately added him to our witness list. We're building something really strong here, Graham told me during one of our preparation sessions. Your family thought they could overwhelm you with emotional manipulation and social pressure. They didn't count on you having this much evidence or being willing to fight back this hard. I also found email correspondence between my parents and me from 2 years ago when they'd first moved in. My mother had written a long email thanking me for letting them stay temporarily and promising they'd be out of your hair in just a few months. Shed specifically written that they knew it was my home and my generosity, and they'd never want to overstay their welcome. That email directly contradicted their current claims that they'd always been co-owners or long-term residents with rights to the property. Even better, I found the actual rental agreement ID drafted when they moved in. It'd been organized about it at the time, wanting to establish clear expectations. The agreement spelled out that they were temporary residents with no ownership claims, that they acknowledged my sole ownership, and that they could be asked to leave with 30 days' notice. Both of my parents had signed it. My father's signature was clear and undeniable on a document that completely destroyed their current legal position. When I showed Graham that rental agreement, he actually laughed, a sound I'd never heard from him before. This is devastating to their case, he said, holding up the document like it was made of gold. They signed away any argument they might have made about adverse possession or tenant rights. They acknowledged in writing that you are the sole owner and they have no claim. Combined with everything else we have, they're going to be destroyed in court. I also tracked down the text message thread between my father and my uncle Porter that I'd found earlier. Porter had written things like, I can notarize whatever you need and family is family. We have to stick together and Mallory's always had everything handed to her anyway. It's Fiona's turn. These messages prove that Porter had knowingly participated in the fraud, using his position as a notary to legitimize forged documents. Graham immediately flagged this for potential criminal prosecution beyond just the civil case. The 5 days before the hearing were the most intense of my life. I barely slept, spending every free moment organizing evidence and preparing testimony. Shayla kept me fed and sane, reminding me to eat and sleep when I got too obsessed with preparation. Graham drilled me on how to testify, warning me that my family's attorney would try to provoke emotional responses and that I needed to stay calm and factual no matter what they said. The night before the hearing, I laid out all my evidence on Shayla's kitchen table and just looked at it. Years of mortgage payments, the original deed, the rental agreement with my parents' signatures, the forged documents with the wrong signature, Fiona's fake engagement evidence, my parents' tax problems, and IRS debt, the text messages, proving premeditation, bank records and email correspondence and social media posts. It was overwhelming in its completeness. I had proof of everything, receipts for every claim I'd made. My family had built their case on lies and emotional manipulation. I'd built mine on documentation and truth. Shayla came and stood next to me, looking at the spread of papers. "You're going to win," she said with absolute certainty. "They thought you'd just give up and walk away because that's what you've always done. They didn't realize you'd finally hit the point where enough was enough." I nodded, feeling that determination settle into my bones. Tomorrow, I'd walk into that courtroom and prove that my house was mine, that my family had committed fraud, and that their lies couldn't survive contact with evidence. Tomorrow, I'd stop being the family doormat and start being the property owner who'd earned every single thing they'd tried to steal. The courthouse looked imposing in the morning light, all concrete and glass and the weight of justice. I walked up the steps with Graham beside me and Shayla right behind us for moral support. As we entered the building, I saw my entire extended family already there, clustered together on benches, like they were attending some kind of sporting event where they were rooting for me to lose. My grandmother Daphne sat front and center, her face set in lines of disapproval. My Aunt Bernice whispered to my mother, both of them shooting me looks that would have made me feel guilty and small if I hadn't spent the last week preparing for exactly this. My parents sat at the plaintiff's table with their attorney Roland, a man who looked like every sleazy lawyer stereotype come to life with his expensive suit that was just slightly too shiny and his practiced expression of righteous concern. Fiona sat behind them in the gallery, wearing a conservative dress and her fake engagement ring, clearly positioned to look like the innocent victim of her cruel older sister. They all watched as I took my seat next to Graham, and I could see they truly believed they were going to win. Judge Lenora entered, a sharp-eyed woman in her late 50s who'd been on the bench for 20 years according to Graham's background research. She had a reputation for being fair but impatient with nonsense, which Graham said would work in our favor. She called the case to order, and the nightmare truly began when Roland stood to present his client's case. Roland started by painting my parents as elderly, vulnerable people who'd invested years of their lives and significant financial resources into maintaining the family home. He glossed over the fact that it was my home entirely, instead referring to it as the residence, like it was some neutral property with unclear ownership. He produced the forged joint account documents, presenting them as if they were legitimate proof of my parents' financial contributions. "According to these records, Your Honor, my clients have been paying substantial portions of the mortgage for the past several months, establishing them as co-owners with clear financial investment in the property." Then my father took the stand, and I watched him transform into a completely different person. His voice shook with emotion as he described how he and my mother had fallen on hard times, and how I generously offered to let them move in. But instead of presenting it as they're moving into my house, he told it like we'd all decided together to consolidate the family into one home. "We thought we were building something together," he said, his eyes suspiciously damp. "A multi-generational household where we'd all support each other. I never imagined my own daughter would try to throw us out after we'd invested so much." Roland prompted him about finances, and my father produced what looked like receipts for home improvements and renovations. He claimed he'd paid for a new roof, new appliances, and significant repairs over the years he'd lived there. The numbers added up to nearly $40,000, all supposedly his contributions. I knew for a fact that I'd paid for the roof and the appliances myself, had the real receipts to prove it, but watching him lie so smoothly under oath made my stomach turn. These were fake receipts, manufactured documents designed to make it look like he'd been financing the house. My mother took the stand next, and her performance was even worse. She cried delicately into a tissue while describing how heartbroken she was by my attitude. Roland asked her about my supposed promise to give the house to Fiona, and my mother nodded enthusiastically. Oh yes, Mallory specifically told us that Fiona should have the house when she was ready to settle down. She said Fiona deserved stability after struggling for so long. We all agreed as a family that this was the right thing to do. It was a complete fabrication, an utter lie, but she delivered it with such sincere conviction that I saw several people in the gallery nodding along. Then came Fiona's testimony, and this was where their case got truly disgusting. Roland had her describe our childhood, emphasizing how I'd always been jealous of her, always competing with her, always trying to undermine her happiness. She painted me as a bitter, career-obsessed woman who couldn't stand to see her younger sister succeed. When Roland asked about the current situation, Fiona's voice broke with emotion. I thought my sister loved me, she said, tears streaming down her face. When I told her Brett and I were getting engaged and starting a life together, I thought she'd be happy for me. Instead, she became vindictive. She wants to take away the home she promised me just to hurt me. Roland entered into evidence the fake engagement photos, presenting them as proof of Fiona's legitimate need for the house. He described her fiancé Brett as working overseas, which conveniently explained why he wasn't present. He claimed that Fiona and Brett had already sent out wedding invitations listing my house as their residence, that Brett's family from overseas was planning to attend the wedding, and that my refusal to honor my supposed promise was causing chaos in their wedding plans. Attorney Roland then circled back to finances, arguing that my parents had established clear residency rights through their 2-year presence in the house and their financial contributions. He claimed that forcing elderly parents out of their home would be cruel and potentially illegal under tenant protection laws. He suggested that I was trying to illegally evict them because I'd changed my mind about our family arrangement, making me look capricious and heartless. The final blow in their presentation came from my grandmother Daphne, who Roland called as a character witness against me. She took the stand with her elderly dignity and described me as always difficult, always selfish from childhood. She claimed I'd been jealous of Fiona since the day she was born, that I'd never been able to be happy for anyone else's success. She said she was heartbroken to see what I'd become and that my behavior toward my family was disgraceful and unforgivable. Throughout all of this, extended family members in the gallery nodded and murmured agreement. Uncle Porter sat there looking righteous despite his role in forging documents. Aunt Bernice dabbed at her eyes with sympathy for my poor parents. Cousins who'd grown up with me looked at me with disappointment and disgust. The whole room seemed to turn against me, accepting every lie as truth, believing that I was exactly the monster my family had painted me to be. Roland concluded his presentation with a flourish, arguing that my parents had established both financial investment and residency rights, that Fiona had legitimate expectations based on family promises, and that I was attempting to unjustly evict vulnerable family members from what had become their home too. He asked the judge to recognize my parents' co-ownership claim, and to grant Fiona rights to the property based on my alleged promise, and the family's collective investment. Your Honor, he said in his most persuasive voice, this is simply a case of a daughter trying to go back on her word and hurt her family out of spite and jealousy. We ask that you prevent this injustice. When he finished, I looked at Judge Lenore's face and felt my heart sink. She looked skeptical, but I couldn't tell if she was skeptical of their claims or of my position. The entire room seemed heavy with judgment against me. My family had just spent an hour painting me as a jealous, vindictive liar who was trying to steal from her own parents and ruin her sister's happiness. They'd presented forged documents as real, fake receipts as legitimate expenses, and complete fabrications as family promises. And for a horrible moment, sitting there with everyone's eyes on me, I wondered if evidence would even matter against such committed, theatrical lying. Then Graham stood up. And I remembered that unlike my family, we had the truth. Graham stood slowly, deliberately, letting the moment stretch until everyone in the courtroom was focused on him. "Your Honor, if I may present our evidence," he said in a voice that was calm and absolutely confident. He walked to the evidence table and picked up a folder, opening it with the care of someone handling something precious. "These are the original mortgage documents for the property in question, signed 5 years ago when my client Mallory was 27 years old and purchased this house with her own funds." He placed the documents on the projector so everyone could see them on the screen. The date stamp was clear: 5 years earlier, before my parents had moved in, before any of their supposed contributions. And as you can see, Your Honor, only one name appears on these documents: Mallory's. Not her parents. Not her sister. Just Mallory, who qualified for this mortgage on her own income and creditworthiness. He let that sit for a moment before continuing. "My client's parents' names appear nowhere on the original deed, nowhere on the original mortgage, nowhere on any of the founding documents of this property." Graham then produced 5 years of bank statements, each one highlighted to show the mortgage payments. Every single payment, Your Honor, for 60 months, came directly from my client's personal checking account. He walked through them methodically, showing the consistent pattern of payments always from the same account in Mallory's name alone, not from a joint account, not from her parents, from Mallory, who has never missed a payment, and who has built up over $120,000 in equity through her sole financial investment. Roland tried to object, saying this was already established and that his clients weren't disputing ID made payments, just that they'd made payments too. Graham smiled slightly and said that was precisely his point. "The opposing counsel claims my client's parents have been paying portions of the mortgage. Let's examine that claim." He produced my parents' bank records, obtained through legal discovery, and projected them on the screen. "These are Harrison and Judith's bank records for the past 3 years. As you can see, not a single mortgage payment appears. Not one transfer to a mortgage company. Not one payment that could be construed as contributing to housing costs beyond normal living expenses." The courtroom went very quiet. Graham continued relentlessly. "The joint account that opposing counsel referenced was created fraudulently just 4 months ago. To prove this, I'd like to call our first witness." Clark from the bank came forward and was sworn in. He explained his position at the bank and how he'd helped me review my account after I suspected fraud. Graham asked him about the joint account creation, and Clark pulled out his records. 4 months ago, someone who identified himself as the father of the account holder called, asking about procedures for adding co-owners to adult children's mortgages. I explained it would require notarized permission from the account holder and likely her physical presence. The caller thanked me and hung up. 2 weeks later, documents appeared in our system showing that a joint account owner had been added, but I noticed immediately that the signature didn't match our signature on file for the account holder. Clark looked directly at my father. I flagged it internally as suspicious, and when Miss Mallory came in asking about her account, I knew something fraudulent had occurred. Graham thanked Clark and turned to the forged signature document, projecting both the forged signature and examples of my real signature side by side. "The difference is obvious, Your Honor. This is a clear case of forgery." Then Graham produced emails between my father and Clark's bank, time-stamped to show my father's inquiry about adding co-owners. Had left a paper trail of his premeditation. Next came the supposed home improvement receipts my father had presented. Graham methodically destroyed each one. He produced the real receipts for the roof replacement, showing it had been paid from my account, not my father's. He showed the appliance purchase records with my name and credit card. Then, he revealed something even more damning. The receipts my father had presented were fraudulent. Graham had tracked down the supposed contractors, and none of them had records of working on my house or receiving payments from Harrison. One contractor confirmed had never even been to my address. The receipts were fake, manufactured specifically for this court case. Graham let the weight of proven fraud settle over the room before moving to his next point. Now let's address Miss Fiona's supposed engagement and need for this house. He pulled up her social media posts, the ones with her engagement photos looking so happy and in love. These photos appear to show Miss Fiona with her fiancé Brett at their engagement. He paused for effect. Except, Brett doesn't exist. Graham showed the results of the reverse image search, displaying how each photo came from stock photography websites. Here's the original photo of the proposal from a wedding planning website's promotional materials. Here's the romantic dinner photo from a restaurant's marketing campaign. Miss Fiona purchased these stock images and presented them as her own engagement photos. Fiona's face went pale. People in the gallery started whispering. Graham wasn't done. He produced the receipt from the online retailer showing Fiona had purchased her own engagement ring 2 weeks before her supposed proposal. He showed her search history if she'd been careless enough not to clear it, revealing searches for things like how to fake an engagement and convincing engagement ring under $500. Then Graham presented Fiona's Pinterest boards, the ones dated 6 months before her supposed engagement, showing detailed plans for renovating my house. She has renovation plans dated from long before this supposed engagement, Your Honor. She has shopping lists, timelines, notes about needing to get my client out of the house by spring. This wasn't about providing a home for a legitimately engaged couple. This was a premeditated scheme to steal my client's property. Graham called me as a witness, and I took the stand with my heart pounding. He asked me about my promise to give Fiona the house, and I stated clearly under oath that I had never made any such promise. I explained that it allowed my parents to stay temporarily during their financial hardship and later allowed Fiona to stay as well, but it never suggested the house would be anyone's but mine. Graham then entered the rental agreement I'd drafted when my parents moved in. This document, signed by both Harrison and Judith 2 years ago, explicitly states that they are temporary residents with no ownership claim. It says clearly, residents acknowledge sole ownership by Mallory and agree they have no present or future claim to the property. Both of your signatures are right here. My father's face turned red as Graham projected the document showing his clear signature on an agreement that destroyed his entire legal position. But the most devastating evidence was still coming. Graham produced my parents' tax records, the ones it accessed through the shared software my father had given me permission to use years ago. Your Honor, these records show that Harrison and Judith have failed to properly file taxes for 3 years and currently owe the Internal Revenue Service $73,000 in back taxes, penalties, and interest. This gives them clear financial motive for wanting to gain control of my client's house, which has equity of approximately $120,000, conveniently enough to cover their tax debt with money to spare. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Lenora banged her gavel for order. Graham continued without mercy. They didn't want this house to give to Fiona out of paternal love. They wanted it to sell it, claim the proceeds as family assets, and use my client's hard-earned equity to pay off their own financial disasters. Graham then produced text messages between my father and Uncle Porter, obtained through my phone records since my father had texted me from the same threads. The messages clearly showed them discussing how to get the house transferred, with Porter writing things like, "I can notarize whatever you need and family has to stick together." Your Honor, this proves that Porter, a licensed notary, knowingly participated in creating fraudulent documents. Uncle Porter, sitting in the gallery, suddenly tried to stand and leave. Judge Lenora's voice cracked like a whip. "Sit down. You'll remain until I dismiss you." He sat, looking like he might be sick. Graham called Shayla as a witness to testify about the lockout incident. She described coming to my house to find me locked out, my key no longer working, my parents refusing to let me enter my own home. She verified that it'd been calm and rational, directly contradicting my family's claims of mental instability. Then Graham played the Ring doorbell footage ED backed up to cloud storage, showing the entire incident. The video clearly showed my father changing the locks earlier that day, then later showed me knocking calmly and asking to be let in, while my parents accused me of being violent despite me not having touched anyone or anything. Graham produced my recent medical records showing Id had a routine physical just a week before all this started. The doctor's note stated, "Patient presents as mentally and emotionally stable, with no signs of psychological distress or instability." This directly contradicted my family's narrative that I was having a breakdown. For his final piece of evidence, Graham returned to the rental agreement, this time highlighting a specific clause. This agreement explicitly states, residents acknowledge this is a temporary arrangement and that they may be asked to leave with 30 days' notice. Residents waive any claims to tenant rights, adverse possession, or ownership claims. Both Harrison and Judith signed this voluntarily. They cannot now claim tenant protections or ownership rights they explicitly waived in writing. Graham stood at the center of the courtroom and addressed Judge Lenora directly. "Your Honor, what we have here is a clear case of attempted theft through fraud, forgery, and manipulation. My client purchased this house with her own funds 5 years ago. She has made every single mortgage payment herself. She allowed her parents and sister to stay temporarily out of generosity, and they repaid that generosity by forging documents, manufacturing fake receipts, inventing a fictional engagement, and attempting to steal her property. Every claim they've made has been proven false. Every document they've presented has been shown to be fraudulent. The evidence is overwhelming and irrefutable." Judge Lenora looked at my father, and her voice was ice cold. "Mr. Harrison, did you forge your daughter's signature on bank documents?" My father stammered, his face red and sweating. "I'm her father. I have a right to help manage her finances when I think she's making poor decisions." Judge Lenora cut him off sharply. "That's not how property law works, and you didn't answer my question. Did you forge her signature?" He looked down and mumbled something that might have been yes. She turned to my mother. "Mrs. Judith, were you aware that these documents were forged?" My mother started crying harder but didn't answer. Judge Lenora waited, then moved on. She looked at Fiona. "Is there actually a fiancé named Brett?" Fiona broke down completely, admitting through sobs that no, there wasn't. She'd made him up because she needed everyone to understand why she deserved the house more than I did. Judge Lenora turned to Uncle Porter. "As a notary, did you participate in document forgery knowing these signatures were not authentic?" Porter invoked his Fifth Amendment right not to incriminate himself, which was as good as an admission of guilt. The judge sat back and looked at all the evidence spread before her, then at my family with something close to disgust. "I've seen a lot of things in my years on this bench, but this level of coordinated fraud against a family member is particularly disturbing." She picked up her gavel. "It is the ruling of this court that the property located at the address in question belongs solely and completely to Mallory, as clearly established by the deed, mortgage documents, and payment records. Harrison and Judith have no ownership claim whatsoever and are ordered to vacate the premises immediately." My father started to protest, but the judge held up her hand. "I'm not finished. You and your wife will have 30 days to remove your belongings from the property. During this time, Mallory will be given immediate access to her home, and you will not interfere with her coming and going." She looked at Fiona. "You will also vacate within 30 days. Furthermore, I'm granting a restraining order preventing all 3 of you from contacting Mallory directly for a period of 1 year except through attorneys regarding the property removal." But Judge Lenora still wasn't done. This case involves clear evidence of fraud, forgery, and attempted theft. I'm referring this matter to the district attorney's office for potential criminal prosecution. She looked at my parents directly. "You may face charges for forgery, fraud, and attempted property theft." She turned to Uncle Porter. "Your participation as a notary in what appears to be document fraud will be referred to both the DA and to the State Notary Commission for investigation and potential criminal charges and revocation of your license." Then she added one more thing that made my heart soar. I'm also notifying the Internal Revenue Service of your current address for purposes of tax collection, since your tax debt appears to be a motivating factor in this attempted theft. My father's face went from red to purple. He started yelling at the judge about how this was a family matter and she had no right to interfere. The bailiff, a large man named Hector, quickly moved to remove my father from the courtroom as he continued shouting that this was his house, that I was an ungrateful daughter, that the system was rigged against parents. My mother collapsed in dramatic wailing, requiring 2 people to help her from the courtroom. Fiona sat frozen in her seat, mascara running down her face, the fake engagement ring still glinting on her finger. Extended family members who'd been so sure of my guilt sat in stunned silence, several of them looking guilty about their role in the public shaming it endured. Grandmother Daphne stood and stormed out without looking at anyone, her back rigid with fury. Aunt Bernice tried to approach me, possibly to apologize, but Graham stepped between us and told her the restraining order meant the family should not attempt contact. I sat at the defendant's table feeling like I couldn't quite breathe, couldn't quite believe it was really over. Shayla grabbed my hand and squeezed it so hard it hurt. Graham allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. The truth won, he said simply. Your family bet everything on lies and manipulation, and they lost to documentation and evidence. Everything you earned, everything you built, it's still yours. Nobody can take it from you now. The sheriff escorted me back to my house that same afternoon, and I stood on my front porch with my own key in my hand, feeling like I was seeing the place for the first time. The locks had been changed again, this time by court order to keep my family out and give me back control. I walked through rooms that were mine, truly mine, without anyone who could tell me to leave or claim they had more right to be there than I did. The house felt different, lighter somehow, even though I knew there would be damage to fix and memories to overcome. My parents and Fiona were given 48 hours to collect essential items under sheriff supervision. I stayed with Shayla during that period because I couldn't stand to watch them pack, couldn't trust myself not to say something that would make everything worse. When I returned, I found exactly what I'd expected. They'd trashed the place in petty revenge. There were holes punched in walls, carpets stained with what looked like deliberately spilled wine, appliances that had been working fine now mysteriously broken. Fiona had left a note taped to the bathroom mirror. Hope you enjoy your victory. You've destroyed this family and ruined my life. I hope you're proud of yourself. I photographed everything for the insurance claim and for possible vandalism charges, then threw the note away without responding. Her words had no power over me anymore. The family fallout was immediate and dramatic. My grandmother Daphne sent one final email before blocking me everywhere. You've broken your mother's heart and brought shame on this entire family. I want nothing more to do with you. Don't contact me again. I replied with just 3 words. Already wasn't planning to. And then blocked her right back. I blocked every extended family member who'd participated in the public shaming. Everyone who'd believed lies without asking for my side. Everyone who'd treated me like I was evil for refusing to be stolen from. If they wanted to stay in contact with people who'd committed fraud and forgery, that was their choice, but I didn't need them in my life. Uncle Porter was arrested 2 weeks after the hearing for notary fraud. The state investigation found he'd notarized at least 5 documents with forged signatures, not just mine but apparently for other people too. Had been using his notary position to help friends and family commit fraud for years, and my case had finally exposed him. He faced multiple felony charges and would likely lose his notary license permanently. My father and mother were also charged with attempted property theft, fraud, and forgery. They accepted a plea deal to avoid jail time, 3 years probation, full restitution for the legal fees and damages to my house, community service, and permanent criminal records. Their ages and supposed lack of prior criminal history got them leniency they absolutely didn't deserve, but at least they had to admit their guilt officially. Fiona wasn't charged criminally since she hadn't been directly involved in the forgery, but her reputation was destroyed. Her fake engagement had been exposed in court and reported in the local news since it was part of a public court case. Her friends abandoned her, humiliated by their unwitting participation in her lies. Her social media accounts, once full of supportive comments, became ghost towns as people unfollowed and blocked her. She had to delete everything and start over with new accounts under a different name. She moved to a different city to escape the embarrassment, and I heard through distant channels that she was working retail and living in a studio apartment, the glamorous lifestyle she'd always felt entitled to completely out of reach. My parents were forced to sell what few valuable possessions they had left to pay their portion of the restitution and start paying down their IRS debt. The government put liens on any assets they might acquire and garnished portions of their Social Security checks. They moved to a cheaper apartment complex 2 hours away, downgrading from the comfortable middle-class life they'd maintained by mooching off me to a much harsher financial reality. I felt no sympathy. They'd tried to steal my home, my financial security, my future, and the consequences of that choice were entirely their own fault. The first few weeks after reclaiming my house were difficult emotionally. I went through periods of intense anger, raging at what my family had tried to do and how many people had been willing to believe I was the villain. Then came grief, mourning the family ID thought I had, and accepting that those relationships had maybe always been toxic and one-sided. I started seeing a therapist who specialized in family trauma, and she helped me understand that I'd been conditioned from childhood to accept mistreatment, to prioritize others' needs over my own, to make myself small so Fiona could be big. I learned about setting boundaries, something I'd never really done before. I learned that saying no didn't make me selfish or mean. I learned that protecting myself and my property wasn't cruelty, it was self-respect. I learned that real love doesn't involve manipulation, theft, or emotional blackmail. My therapist helped me see that my family's behavior wasn't about anything I'd done wrong but about their own dysfunction and entitlement that had existed long before this crisis. I renovated the house room by room, both to fix the damage they'd caused and to make the space truly mine in a way it hadn't been while they were living there. I repainted walls in colors I loved instead of the neutral tones my mother had insisted on. I rearranged furniture to suit my preferences rather than how my father thought it should be organized. I planted a garden in the backyard, something I'd always wanted to do but my mother had said was too much work. Each flower I planted felt like a physical representation of new growth, of reclaiming space that was mine. Work became a refuge in a good way. I'd been so stressed during the court case that I'd barely been functioning at my job. But once it was resolved, I threw myself back into my career, with renewed energy. 3 months after the court case, I got a promotion I'd been working toward for years. It was merit-based, something I'd earned through my own skills and hard work, and it came with a significant raise. I used the extra money to create an emergency fund large enough that I'd never feel financially vulnerable again. Never be in a position where I had to rely on family or worry about unexpected expenses. About 6 months after everything settled, I started dating again. I met a man named Felix at a coffee shop, a genuine meeting where we'd both reached for the same pastry and laughed about it. He was kind and steady, worked as a teacher, and had no interest in drama or manipulation. I took things slowly, still learning to trust after what my family had done. But Felix was patient. He never pushed, never made me feel like I owed him anything, never tried to move too fast. When I finally told him the whole story of what had happened with my family, he just shook his head and said that anyone who'd treat family that way wasn't worth my energy. Then he changed the subject and asked if I wanted to try the new restaurant downtown, casually validating my experience and then moving forward instead of dwelling on it. That's when I knew he might be someone special. The most unexpected development came from my father's side of the family. An aunt I barely knew, Elaine, reached out about 8 months after the court case. She'd been estranged from the family for 15 years after her own conflict with my father and grandmother. She explained that she'd heard about what happened and wanted me to know I wasn't alone, that my father had a pattern of this behavior, and that she'd been scapegoated and pushed out in similar ways. We met for coffee, and she shared her story of how the family had turned on her when she'd refused to loan my father money he never intended to pay back. The parallels were striking and validating. Elaine became something like a surrogate mother figure. The healthy family relationship I'd never had with my actual mother. She was honest and direct, called out manipulation when she saw it, and celebrated my successes without competition or resentment. We started having regular coffee dates and holiday dinners together. She introduced me to her chosen family, friends she'd built relationships with over the years, and they welcomed me warmly. I learned that family didn't have to be the people you were born to. It could be the people who chose to love and support you without conditions. A year after the court case, I sat on my front porch on a Saturday morning with my coffee, looking out at the garden I'd planted, and the house I'd fought so hard to keep. I thought about the journey from being the family doormat to being an empowered property owner who'd stood up for herself. I'd learned lessons I'd carry forever. Hard-won wisdom about boundaries and self-worth, and the difference between being used and being valued. The most important lesson was this: being family doesn't give anyone the right to abuse you, use you, or steal from you. My parents' financial problems didn't excuse their actions. They chose manipulation and crime over honesty. They chose to try to destroy their daughter's financial security rather than solve their own problems legitimately. Fiona's golden child status had enabled her to grow into an entitled adult who thought she deserved whatever she wanted simply because she'd always gotten it before. And I had played a role too by allowing boundary violations for years, by accepting disrespect and unequal treatment, by trying to earn love that should have been unconditional. I realized that if I'd set firmer boundaries earlier, if I'd said no when they first asked to move in or at least enforced the temporary nature of their stay, maybe this wouldn't have escalated to theft and fraud. But I couldn't blame myself for their choices. I'd been generous and family-oriented, and they'd exploited that. The fault was entirely theirs. I'd spent 32 years trying to earn love from people who saw me as a resource to be used rather than a person to be valued. I'd confused being useful with being loved, being needed with being appreciated. The real revelation was understanding that I'd been free the moment I stopped seeking their approval, when I accepted that my parents would never be the parents I deserved, that Fiona would never be a real sister, that the extended family would never treat me fairly. I stopped carrying the weight of trying to fix those relationships. I stopped performing for their approval and started living for my own peace. The house had become a symbol of that freedom, a physical representation of my independence and self-respect that nobody could ever take away again. I still had moments of sadness, grieving the family I'd wished for rather than the one I'd had, but mostly I felt relief and peace. My home was quiet now, truly mine, filled only with people I invited in and who respected my space. I'd built a chosen family with Shayla, with Elaine, with Felix and his kind friends, with coworkers who'd supported me through the crisis. These were people who celebrated my successes, who showed up when I needed help, who didn't keep score or demand I prove my worth. My phone buzzed with a text from Felix asking if I wanted to try that new Italian place for dinner tonight. I smiled and texted back yes, then set my coffee cup down and walked out to my garden. I'd planted new flowers last weekend, and they were already starting to bloom, bright colors against the dark soil. I knelt down and pulled a few weeds, feeling the satisfaction of tending to something I'd created, something that was growing and thriving under my care. Looking back at my house from the garden, I felt a wave of pride and peace wash over me. This house represented every sacrifice I'd made, every extra shift I'd worked, every time I'd chosen saving over spending, planning over impulse. It represented my ability to earn and build and create security for myself. And when my family had tried to steal it, I'd fought back with evidence and truth, and stubborn refusal to be a victim anymore. They'd wanted to take my house and leave me with nothing. Instead, they'd freed me from a family that had never valued me for who I was. I didn't just keep my house. I kept my dignity, my truth, and my self-respect. I gained freedom from toxic relationships, clarity about my worth, and the strength to stand up for myself no matter who was on the other side. The house was mine, yes, but more importantly, my life was mine. My choices were mine. My future was mine. I planted one more flower, a bright red dahlia that would bloom all summer, and stood back to admire my work. The house behind me stood solid and permanent, a home I'd earned and defended, and nobody, not family or friends or anyone else, could ever make me doubt that I deserved it. This house was mine. Every brick, every beam, every inch of freedom it represented. And nobody could ever take that away again. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who felt entitled to something that was yours? How did you handle it? Drop your stories in the comments because I know I'm not the only one who's dealt with toxic family dynamics. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories about standing up for yourself and setting boundaries. Share this video with anyone who might need to hear that it's okay to protect what's yours, even from family. Thank you so much for watching, and for your support. Remember that you deserve respect, you deserve boundaries, and you never have to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. Stay strong, protect your peace, and I'll see you in the next story.